Okay, welcome. We're going to be talking about agility tricks today. So what I've got is we're going to be looking at 5 different things you can do, simple things, and kind of how it can help your team, help nudge your team toward getting more agility in the way that they're working. Here's what we've got coming up. We have Austin Chadwick is going to be here, I think, in 2 weeks, and then I think 2 weeks after that, we've got David coming. So we're going to be talking about mob programming with Austin, and then talking about retrospectives with David. Also, just to let you know, here is the URL if you want to see what's coming up. If you go to www.AgileLnL.com, if you take a look at that URL, you can get on the mailing list from there and also see the list of things that are coming up. So that's something if you want to pass it on, if somebody's interested or something, that's the URL to go to. Okay, let's see here. We'll make sure I've got everything running correctly. Let me make one change here. Things keep getting updated and looking different, so I guess it'll work. Okay, so 5 tricks, 5 agility tricks for your team. Let's see. Actually, can everybody hear okay? Give me a thumbs up in the chat. Okay, great. And just so you know, I've got you guys off on your own screen here. If you are on video, I can see you. So if you're eating ribs or something like that, obviously you don't need to be on video, but it is nice to be able to see the audience. So you are where you can be seen, and I like seeing people's reactions and stuff. So feel free to use that if you like. Okay, number 1, cycle time, not velocity. So one of the tricks I've seen that can help teams get a lot more agility is getting teams focused on cycle time instead of velocity. But I have a question for you about that. What is the biggest reason cycle time is more important? So go and vote for this. There should be a link it should pop up in the side, but here's the link in the chat if you need to go to it directly. Do you mind having that link? So the Slido link. If for some reason it's not coming up for you. So what is the biggest reason cycle time is more important than velocity? I rephrased that and botched my grammar on it. Okay, yeah, so there's the link if it doesn't pop up for you in the side. So let's see, it looks like most of us are saying velocity focuses on starting, cycle time focuses on finishing. I think that's good answer. Cycle time identifies problems sooner, which I think is another legitimate answer. These aren't necessarily wrong. None of them are necessarily wrong, just want to see what people thought. Velocity focus can push teams away from agility. So that's something I've seen happen before. And we've got other option here is no, we should focus on velocity, which it looks like no one's voting for, but we might kind of have a little bias based on this group and things that we talk about here. Okay, so when I think of velocity, this is kind of what I think of. It's a way of if you're looking at velocity, you're trying to figure out how many buckets of water can I carry from point A to point B and get them all the way there within a sprint. So that's one way to think about how many things we get done. So we're going to try to, and the tendency, what happens is we try to carry as many buckets of water as we can. And so we want to get from here to there. And so let's get all these buckets of water and try to move them from point A to point B. And hopefully we'll have them all to the other end by the end of the sprint. Now, what happens with that is you run a risk that if something goes wrong, you may be halfway there and spill your buckets of water or have to stop for some reason, and then nothing actually makes it over the finish line. Now, there are obviously other ways you can approach this, but this is what I've seen happen in practice when the team's so focused on velocity that they get really, really focused on okay. You get so focused on velocity that you forget that our goal is to actually finish something. It isn't how much you can. It isn't as important how much you can carry in the sprint. What matters is how frequently you can delight the customer. And so if we get too focused on, and if teams find that reporting velocity, if you're required to in your organization, I'm not trying to say that, oh, that's horrible and there's no way that could possibly work. But if your team is really focused on velocity, you have the potential, and as far as I've seen, a very high potential of being focused on the wrong things in ways that impede your agility. So a trick we can do is focus more on our cycle time and make sure that's what we're talking about. That's what's driving us. And that's what the team is feeling either good or bad about. Did we get good cycle time, or is our cycle time getting slower? And so we have the example of the bucket. So if we think of cycle time, we're going to be thinking more of, okay, good question, very good question. So it's cycle time. What is that? And my apologies, I should have defined that. So cycle time is from when we started something. It's how long it takes to get something from one point to another, just that amount of time for that particular item. Usually when we're thinking more in terms of Agile, it's going to be when we started something, how long does it take until that's in production and the customer is getting benefit from it? Now, there may be reasons that the software doesn't go live till later, so maybe it's all the way to a production-like environment, or even maybe to the staging environment, but ideally all the way through to where the customer is benefiting from it. So we're thinking of cycle time. In my mind, what I think of an analogy to is more of, I've got a pipe and I'm letting water flow through the pipe. So how long does it take when I put water in one end for it to come out the other? And if I'm really focused on that, I'm going to be doing things like looking at it and saying, oh, can I straighten this pipe? What's impeding the flow? Maybe I've got a pipe that goes like this. And like, you know what? I can actually lower my cycle time if I make this part straight and I take out these rocks that are slowing things down. So that's a way to think of cycle time that's focused on when I put something in one end, how long does it take to come out the other? Which is going to be very, very different than the idea of how many buckets of water can I take and carry with me. And one of the advantages of focusing on cycle time is then we start trying to think in terms of how do we make our system better able to deliver stuff. So in this case, I've got a small channel of water, right? As I'm working to improve the system, maybe I get to the point and now I've got something like this flowing, and I've got a way to get things from point A to point B where I'm very focused on how quickly I can do it and how quickly I can satisfy the customer's need. And then kind of maybe if we keep on growing, we end up with something where we've got CI/CD that's running things very, very rapidly. We've got all these things that are working together, but it's all come by focusing on that cycle time of getting from point A to point B as quickly as possible. So we've got something like an aqueduct. And these analogies aren't perfect, but we didn't start with an aqueduct here, right? When we think of the cycle time of how we're delivering software. But over time, in trying to improve it and make things better, you end up building the capacity to better deliver software, better delight the customer with less time between when you start and when it actually delivers to them. Okay, agility trick number 2. Only demo what the customer can experience as progress. Okay, so what do you, does your team demonstrate things the customer can't experience, that they can't experience in the demo? So when you're doing a demo of here's what we did, are you showing them things that they can't go to the software and experience? So for an example of that would be showing, look, we created a database and we're going to show you that there's a database here because on this server now there's a database. And so from the customer standpoint, that doesn't do anything for them yet. They're not able to connect to the database. Doesn't have a UI on it. So that would be demonstrating something the customer can't experience. Or saying we set up part of our build pipeline. We haven't deployed anything yet with it yet, so there is not actually the application, but part of this build pipeline has been built, and that's what's being shown in the demo. So it looks like most of us, or 35%, and then occasionally we'll demo technical work to show what we've been working hard. And that's one of the reasons a lot of people are very interested in demoing stuff like this, is to show that you're getting stuff done. Or no, we only demonstrate work that the user can experience in the application, which is what I'm suggesting here. Yes, we demonstrate user stories and tickets, with the idea of a ticket being something that's not actually changing the user's experience of the application, even if it is something important. We only demo, okay, or down at the bottom, we only demo technical work when it's something the user is especially interested in. So this, trying to get teams to do this has been, and George has a great thing. If you let the customer or the customer or the user actually demo the software, it makes sure that you're doing things that actually have meaning and that they can use, right? They're not going to go in and say, oh yeah, when I telnet into the, or I'm sorry, it shows how old I am. When I SSH into this computer over here, I can see this stuff on the file system. You're not going to have a user doing that. So letting the user actually drive it is one of the best ways to make sure you're focused on demoing things that have meaning to the user. Now, this idea can run, I've been amazed at how much resistance this idea has. I've seen it be very, very effective at getting teams really aligned with how they're delivering software. But I've been amazed at how many people will fight tooth and nail to make sure that this does not happen on their team. And I think one of the reasons that is because people are very, very focused on getting credit for the stuff they did. Not necessarily what the team delivered, but the stuff that they feel like they did in this particular sprint. They want to make sure that people know that they were working hard. And what that leads to is a situation where you've got people working really hard on things that are important to them, but may not necessarily be constrained by what's important to the customer. And so it can really impede your agility because there's lots of things that are important from all these different perspectives, but it's not being guided by here's what the customer really needs, here's what's meaningful to the customer. So what do you see as the biggest objection to demoing only what the customer can experience as progress? So I talked a little bit but on what I've seen, but what do you see as being the biggest objection to demoing only what the customer can experience as progress? So question, what about an environment where a manager thinks demo is the only way to measure project progress? That's not necessarily a bad thing. You just have to make sure you're doing your work in a way where you have something to demo that's meaningful to the user. It means you're probably going to work more in slices that go all the way through the application than dealing with building things up with layers. Like if a team approaches something and says, okay, first sprint, we're going to build out our database layer. We're going to try and imagine everything we could want in the database, and we'll build that out. Now, the user can't use this, but that's okay. We're just going to build this out. Well, you wouldn't have anything to demo because that's not something that has meaning to the user in the way that they interact with the application. On the other hand, if you said, okay, what's the simplest thing that the user can interact with? Let's build just as much as we need in the UI, just as much as we need in kind of the middle layer, and just as much as we need in the database that the user can actually experience this. And as George said, maybe actually even drive it. Then you're going to be working with a slice all the way through. So the goal here of not demoing things is to change our behavior as much as it is to make sure that we're showing things that have meaning to the customer, keep them engaged and stuff like that. Okay, so the customer won't realize how much has to happen behind the scenes. And this is a very real objection, right? And this is but what ends up happening is when teams are objecting to this and saying they won't realize how much happens behind the scenes or how much work needs to go into this. Usually what is driving that is that we don't want to change our behavior to be more agile in the way that we're delivering stuff to the customer. So if this is an objection, we need to stop and think, is it really because the customer won't realize how much work is being done? Or is it because I don't want to change the way that I'm delivering this? Do I want to deliver things in layers where if I was doing this, I'd have to deliver things in slices all the way through? And maybe for various reasons, we've got people on the team that just don't like working like that. They would rather build up layers because that's how they'd rather deliver things based on how they see the application as a developer than the way the user experiences it. Because as a developer, I'm thinking, okay, we've got this architecture, we've got an operating system down at the bottom, and then we've got the database, and then we've got kind of the business logic layer, and then we've got the UI, and that's how I think of an application. That is not how your user thinks of the application. The user, let's say it's an accounting application, the user is going to be thinking of, here's the piece where I can actually enter in checks in order to be able to balance stuff later. Here's the piece where I'm able to reconcile when this check comes back. Here's the piece where I set up my chart of accounts. And those things go all the way through all those layers. Yes.
I think there's like, I've observed additional reasons and gotten feedback about additional things that people might think. Some from our business clients, like I've heard there's sort of sometimes there's disconnect around the understanding of the purpose of that meeting. So I've talked to engineers who feel like unclear about whether that's actually a forum for showing that back end stuff, or that kind of more engineering perspective driven kind of conversation. I've heard from business clients that say, oh, well, we know that meeting is also for engineers to talk to engineers. So when they're doing their thing, we just tune out. So sometimes it's around like, coming to consensus about what are we doing here? Who is this for? But also like I expect most teams are showing their audiences people who are in the company. And I think that sometimes makes it a little harder to make the leap from that to thinking about the customer. Because you're showing stuff to people that maybe you interact with regularly. Maybe they understand some of your language. Um, Maybe some of them are more technical. So I think that having, like, I've not worked in a situation where I've worked with a team that's actually talking to end users
Okay.
in review. It's usually an intermediary. So I think that changes the conversation sometimes for people.
Well, and when we talk about end users, there are the like let's say your company produces something and there are people that go out to the public internet and do things with your software. You're probably not going to go gather up all these people from all over the United States and bring them in and sure, or where the world, bring them in and have them do it. But there are customers internally that are the people that are experiencing that software, the people that are paying for the software, the people that are
Mhm.
interacting with those users and stuff. And those are your customers and your users from that standpoint. Now, the thing that you're bringing up of saying some of the things they're wanting to do is show things to other engineers. I have seen a huge amount of work gets I've seen scope grow tremendously based on exactly what you're saying there. If I'm doing this for other engineers, not necessarily for the customer, and the scope just grows to huge proportions because it's being driven by what would I like to see as an engineer rather than what's the most efficient thing I can do to take the next step for the customer. But there are situations though where you've got maybe a team doing work as an enablement team, and I think theoretically there are situations where having an enablement team may be able to be very efficient for things. In actual practice, I've never seen it work very well. It hasn't ever been an efficient way of delivering things for the end customer. But for example, you might have a team that's working on CI/CD stuff, and they're responsible for CI/CD. Now, in most cases where I've seen people do that, they end up building something that's not very well aligned with what the development teams actually need unless they're working really, really close together. But in that case, the customer there is not going to be your end user. It's not going to be even the people that are asking for the software. It's going to be those development teams. So there might be places where you want to say, hey, our actual customers here are other developers, and we're going to have something that because that does have meaning to the developers, right? The developers may go in and do this thing at the command line and something related to it because that's how they interact with this. So there may be some work that's not that where the user actually is other developers, and that probably would, that's a great thing to demo. Those are good things to show. Probably isn't something you want to show as part of whatever the application is you're trying to build because that's not the audience really. So, and there are all kinds of reasons that you may have to do some of this. I'm just trying to say here's some things that if you can lean into and head toward, I've seen get really, really good results. So in this case, if we only demo what the customer can experience, what I've seen happen when teams really lean into trying to do this is they end up avoiding gold plating because they're thinking, what's the next step I can take for the user? And if I'm really, really focused on what I can take for the user and the customer, the people that are paying for this and the way that they're asking for the features in the software, I'm going to be a lot more focused on those features. It also balances between architecture and user needs because if I'm thinking in terms of how do I design this architecturally, and my goal is to design an architecture, I'm going to be much more prone to deliver an architecture without it being constrained by here's what the user actually needs, and I'm going to grow the architecture as we discover more of the user's needs and as that application evolves. It also increases transparency on the return on investment because if I'm able to show the customer every week, here's what we gave you, this is ready to be deployed, whatever it is, hopefully it's all the way through to production, but here's the thing that you paid X amount, you paid for 2 weeks worth of our development team to work on this, here's the thing, you can go in and experience it today. I've now made it very, very clear how much they're paying and what they're getting for it. It also helps us spotlight problems earlier. if we have an expectation that we're going to go for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, I've seen some teams like a year of building out runway, building out infrastructures, things that aren't actually tied to a feature that the user needs, and we make a mistake and we're not headed in the right direction, it may be a year or 6 months, whatever that time period is, we give ourselves a lot more distance to go before we actually come back and say, was this working? So by demoing just what the customer can experience as progress, the person that's actually writing the check, if they don't see anything for 6 weeks, they ought to be asking questions, right? Because they're not seeing anything that lets them know what type of return on investment they're getting. So that helps spotlight those problems. If we're not actually able to deliver things that are useful to the customer all the way through to where the customer can use them, see them, and demo them, we want to see that sooner. We want to experience that sooner instead of later. Experience those problems sooner instead of later. And it helps constrain the scope creep, because if I'm very focused on here's the thing I'm trying to deliver to the customer and I need to get something done because we've got a demo coming up, I am going to be much more willing to ask the customer and have conversations saying, is there any piece we can leave out of this so we have something to demo to you? Because if I'm trying to bite off a big chunk like this, I'm going to have much better agility if I bite off a smaller piece, get feedback on it, show it to them. I may show them something and they say, yeah, you know what? That's exactly what we asked for. Thank you so much for doing that. Turns out that's not at all what we want. That's not a bad thing unless you've invested so much in it that it's an expensive thing to change from. And I've seen users and customers do that. And that's just part of the process. Let's see. Somebody's saying they see 2 different audiences, 2 different demos. I think that's a great thing. And Ruth, you mentioned building trust and giving feedback. And I think that's absolutely a key part of this, is if I'm able to demo stuff that they can actually experience, and like George said, things they can actually touch and drive themselves, I'm now setting a foundation for our ability to deliver consistently with them. If I'm really erratic when I deliver stuff, that project may have a much higher chance of being canceled just because they don't know if they can trust what they're going to get out of it, because there's lots of work happening that doesn't translate into things that actually have meaning directly to what they're trying to achieve, which is the application. Okay, number 3. Agility trick number 3. Let everyone on the team run the daily stand-up and retrospective. If a meeting is for the team, then they should be able to take ownership of it. So, question for you, who runs your retrospective? I was going to ask stand up, but let's do retrospective. Who runs the retrospective on your team? And keep in mind here, I'm not saying it's bad for the Scrum Master to run the retrospective. I'm just suggesting we want the team to see ownership of it. And if we do that, we will get a lot more agility around the idea of we regularly reflect on what we're doing and try to improve things. So it looks like most of us have the Scrum Master. 13% random person on the team, so that's kind of cool. Our specific person on the team, and manager and business owner up there too. So what I'm suggesting with this is that if we focus the team on the idea that this is something that's beneficial to them, there's nothing magical about running a retrospective. And we may be able to get a lot more buy-in for the value of it if we let the team actually run them. Now, that doesn't mean, Scrum Master's part of the team. That's great if the Scrum Master runs it sometime. But we probably don't want to be in a situation to where the Scrum Master is the only person that could possibly get up and run it. Because if we establish the idea that this is for the team and by the team, we will get better agility because we're going to have better buy-in, better understanding of what it's for. Data invite roles to run. Okay, cool. Okay, number 4. Celebrate team behavior. So and there were lots of ways to kind of slice these things up, and as I get into it, I think next time I may slice these a little bit differently. Let's think about team behavior and say, what types, okay, I see where I am. Okay, I threw this in the middle because I wanted to get, while I've got everybody's attention, please rank which types of talks you find, and then we'll come back to the team behavior. Which types of talks do you thought would be most interested in hearing more about? So while you're ranking those, and I think it's set up if you just rank the top 3 that you'd be interested in, that will give me the feedback I need. But how AI can be used to create software, behavior-driven development, test-driven development, computer science and technical topics, career advancement and personal development, more things on user stories. I think Kanban and Scrum were the other things on there. So go ahead and rank those. And while you're ranking those, I'll talk a little bit about the idea of celebrating team behavior. Actually, let me see. I actually have another question about that, so I won't give it away. Otherwise, I'll get ahead. Okay, so go ahead and rank what you think. I'll give it a few minutes. I'm wanting to make sure that the things I'm coming up with and doing line up with what people want to hear about. Okay, so we'll give it a few more seconds. And if you're, okay, yeah, the link's in there. Please do go ahead and fill this out. This is really valuable feedback, and usually I only get a fraction of the people responding, so I really appreciate if you take the time to go ahead and do that. Okay, we'll give it a few more seconds. So I've got one more person finishing things up. And Jason, I'll have to look up the ADA initiative roles. That's not something I'm familiar with. That looks interesting. Okay, moving on, talking about celebrating team behavior. So a question for you here. What types of recognition does your organization seem to prioritize? So what types of recognition does your organization seem to prioritize? Do you prioritize team recognition or individual recognition? And my guess is it's probably going to be individual recognition, which is a lot easier to do. We're going to look at some ways that you may be able to still leverage that in ways that are focused on the team, even if that's how your organization is set up. Okay, so it looks like most of us, 78%. It's interesting about a quarter are saying that team recognition. So that's very cool. That's great, and I think that's probably something headed in a very good direction for achieving agility. So that's awesome if that's what you're experiencing. So celebrating team behavior. So here are 2 things that we could do, and 2 things I want to point out with possible behavior on teams. So the first one, almost everyone finishes the story they were assigned and starts another. That is a behavior that you will likely see on a lot of teams, is doing that type of thing. On the other hand, if everyone helps others finish before starting something new, this is the behavior that we really want to celebrate. We want to celebrate when people are doing this. Because this will get us more agility than we will get if everybody's just trying to start their own thing next. And the reason it gives us more agility is, one, it's focused on actually finishing and delivering something through that will delight the customer. So it wins on that side of things. It also wins on the idea of the team actually trying to work together and collaborate. It wins on the idea of the team is focused more on not just how can I get something that's got my name on it and move it across the finish line, but how can I as a team actually move something across the finish line. Kind of a little bit related to this, one thing I see that helps end up with this bottom one instead of the top one is to not put people's names on individual stories. And sometimes there's reasons where you need to for different tracking and things, but if I don't have a name on a story, if every story that I complete has my name on it, how willing is it going to be easier or harder for me to be willing to go over here and find somebody else that needs help? And if I'm saying there's no name on my story, it's not going to look like I'm doing anything, I might be more resistant to going and trying to help somebody else finish than I am to try to pull another story in. So it's a very little thing, but it has a big impact on the type of behavior you get from your team. It has a big impact on the agility you get from your team, because one way, focused on what story did you finish, drives behavior that is at odds with agility. Having everybody see the stories as being a team effort that's assigned to the team gets us a lot closer to having better agility because we're focused on how the team succeeds as a whole. Okay, so another team behavior. Senior dev says to give them, oh, I didn't write this. Okay, senior dev, I understand what I'm saying. Senior dev says, give me all the difficult stories. You know, I'm the senior person here, so give me all the things that have to do with this technology because it's difficult and I'm the one that understands it and I'll just work on it so no one else has to. Or, so that would be one thing, which wouldn't be team behavior. Team behavior, though, would be the senior dev offering to help the junior dev with the difficult work. There's this story that's really difficult. You haven't ever done anything before. I've got a lot of experience. Let's work together, and then you'll have some of the experience that I have and be able to work on these types of things. So if we celebrate in a way, like if we make a big deal about how the senior dev went off and disappeared for 2 weeks and did this thing that was really, really hard, we're going to be celebrating something that pushes us away from team behavior, that pushes us away from agility. Now, that's not to say there's never a time for a senior person to go work heads down on something and then come back with it. But as a general rule, if we're wanting to make sure that the team is growing overall, and that we're distributing our knowledge of how to do things, and that we're preparing for being able to deliver even more with more agility in the future, this last one is probably what we want to celebrate. And we just want to make sure that we're not celebrating in a way that pushes us toward always behaving like that top one at the expense of people being able to feel like they can behave like the second one. Another one here. Celebrate team behavior. The team followed the plan and missed the sprint goal. The customer wishes they had asked for other stories first. This is something I've seen happen a lot. They've got a goal out there. We're trying to do this, this, and this. And they're so focused on doing that even when they get into it and discover some of these things are hard or different, or maybe some things are actually impossible that they thought they could do, and they get to the end of the sprint and the customer's like, yeah, you did this stuff, but really I wish we had to prioritize these other things over here. That's not a good outcome. That's not a good team outcome. What we do want, though, is what would probably be better is if the team fails to meet the sprint goal, but the customer has absolutely no regrets about what was delivered and what was deferred. This is more success than this is, right? If the customer is happy with what you delivered and says, yes, we prioritize this well, going into it, we didn't understand things that now we understand, but when we discovered those things, we made changes to what we were doing in order to, that the place we're at today, we wouldn't go back and trade out what we built for something else. What we built is what we wanted. What we built puts us in the best possible place, and we adjusted as we went. So if we're in a situation where our team is celebrating, or where we're not able to celebrate this, we need to change the way we celebrate things as a team. Another one, celebrate team behavior. Senior dev says, oh, whoops, went the wrong way. Okay. Team says the code is done on every story in the sprint, but it hasn't been tested or deployed. I've been on teams where that would be considered more of a success than the team finishing 90% of the stories in the goal, but the ones that are done are the ones that are complete, have no hidden work. They've been deployed all the way and are in production. We ought to be more willing to celebrate this than the top one, where we've actually got a bunch of hidden work still there. And so these are just different examples of trying to think about how we celebrate things as a team, because it's really easy to get kind of this individual mindset and celebrate things that are, and the team feeling like they're doing the right thing when we're doing things that are actually going against our ability to deliver with agility. We need to celebrate, a way I would say is we need to celebrate doing the right things more than getting a specific result. Because if I do the wrong things and I get a result that's good, that's not success, right? Because I'm not setting myself up to actually continue delivering over and over in ways that will deliver for the customer. I want to make sure I'm celebrating doing the right things, because if I'm doing the right things, I'll get the good results over time as I build culture. Matter of fact, I may do all the right things, and for some reason, it's hard for the team, it's new, lots of reasons, I may get worse results than if I did the wrong things and took shortcuts and stuff like that. So we want to make sure we're celebrating doing the right things, because that's what will give us kind of this long-range view of, the team being able to work together indefinitely instead of just doing either heroic things or taking shortcuts. There is an example, there was a study done where they took a bunch of kids and they had them take a test. And at the end of the test, they had two groups. One group, they said, wow, look how good you did on this test. You are all really, really smart. You're so smart. You did so good on this test. That's just awesome. You're all so smart on how you did on this test. You guys are awesome at being very, very smart. So the other group they took and they told them, they said, wow, look how good you did on this test. You must have worked really hard on this test. You paid really good attention to it. You must have been studying hard. There's all these things you did that got these results. Look at all the good things that you did that led to these great outcomes. Then a few weeks later, they tried to have another test that was optional, and they asked the kids if they wanted to take this other test that was going to be, I think it was supposed to be even more difficult. The group that had been told that they did well because they were really, really smart didn't want to take the test. Most of them didn't want to even try on the test. The group that had been told, look how hard you worked on it, you got really good results because of how good you are at working hard, they were much more willing to go ahead and take the test. And the reason was because one of them saw it as being, this is just who I am, we did well because of this, and they weren't willing to try as hard. Whereas the other group saw that what they were good at was trying hard, of doing the right thing, of actually studying and those types of things. And we want to make, while that's related to children, we want to make sure that we're setting up our teams with that same ability to succeed, that they're getting good feedback, and they're getting recognized for their success of doing the right things, more so than if they happen to, in that particular instance, those 2 weeks, everything, all the stars align, and they happen to get everything done that they were expecting to. Okay, and oh yes, how to celebrate. So here's some things, and we think celebrations don't necessarily have to be huge things, but here's some ideas for celebrations that I've done with teams that have been fun and had kind of an outside impact, like people remember them more so than what I thought they would be, for as easy as they were. A recognition wall. I remember one team we were working with, we were trying to get everybody really thinking about keeping the code in good shape, continuing to develop the code, and code hygiene is what we were calling it. So we had set up something that would, I think it was Sonar, would go through and show if there were things that maybe could be done better, like issues in the code that were maybe some code smells or things like that. And we wanted people to go in, take some time, because we wanted to develop a culture around finding things that could be improved and making those improvements. So we had the hygiene club, and we had whiteboards all around this room. So I wrote whatever the project was, hygiene club. And if you went in and actually changed one of these things, fixed one of these findings in Sonar, however small it was, you got your name on the code hygiene wall. And it was a very simple thing, but people started noticing names going up on the code hygiene wall. And it was like, how can I contribute to that? Including the graphic designer, who he was good at HTML. He wasn't necessarily really in code, but he was like, hey, Mark, I want to get my name up on the wall. What can I do to go in? And so we got him set up, and he was able to go in, and we walked through it, something that was in his wheelhouse with, I think with HTML or JavaScript he had some experience with. And we went and we found something and we fixed it, and he got to figure out how to do things with Git. But the point I wanted to make is that would have been very easy for him to go, oh yeah, that's not my thing. That's the developers' things. I don't really need to be involved. But it was something that was prominent enough that he saw. He was like, yeah, I want to do that. I want to be part of what all the team is doing here and getting, helping keep our code headed in the right direction. So it was a small thing, but it was, and I've seen people do it on wikis too. They've got, as people do things on wikis, you've got this list of names, and people want to be part of that because it's their way of being part of the team. I've also done things where there was something we were trying to do, and we gave everybody, I bought a bunch of cheap Lego figures, and whenever you got whatever it was we were trying to do, you got to pick your Lego figures. I think there were Marvel characters or something like that. So after a while, people started noticing above the different desk areas, everybody had a Lego figure. Like, where'd you get that? Well, our team's trying to do X, Y, and Z, and once we show we know how to do it, we get one of these. Once we do our first one, we get one of these. And it's a simple thing, but it was fun, and had, for the cost of the Lego figures versus the change it actually brought about in the way that in our behavior and what we were able to do, it was an extremely good investment. Another way to celebrate things, whenever you do a retrospective, I highly recommend you have a thumbs up or a kudos column. Because giving people a chance to recognize each other, like, hey, Joe really helped me out with this when he finished his story and he came and worked on the one I was doing, and I probably wouldn't have got done if he didn't do that. Those are great things to make sure that you're giving people a chance to recognize each other. A thank you at daily stand-up. Like I said, this is a very, very small thing, but if somebody does something that really models the team behavior, call it out. And this shouldn't just be like only the Scrum Master can do this. Create a space to where it's okay for people to say, hey, so-and-so did this, I really, really appreciate that. Doesn't have to take a lot of time, but those are important things in pushing your team forward. And recognition at a demo. Particularly at the demo, you've got usually lots of management. That's a great place to recognize someone. One thing I've seen teams do is somebody new comes on, a junior developer, and they're working with a senior developer. And when it's time to actually do the demo, if the developers are doing the demo, you let the junior person do it and really celebrate that they helped deliver their first story that's now in production, and make that a big deal that we brought this new person on. And look, in the first 2 weeks, they were able to deliver something. Small thing, but it means a lot to people. Rite of passage recognition. So one thing I've done in the past, there was a tool we were using called Chef, and it was a DevOps tool that would let you deploy your code. In this particular team, when you took on a story, the developer took on the story, but also they were responsible for deploying it and everything, writing code for it in Chef and everything, getting that out. So the way that you did things with Chef is you wrote individual recipes. So when somebody wrote their first recipe in Chef, I bought a bunch of Chef hats, those little paper hats thing, they're like 50 cents a piece or so. And you would get one in your mail. This team was remote. So you'd see people start popping up on video, and they were wearing their Chef hat because they had finished their first recipe and they got one of these things, as the rite of passage of doing this first one. It was a simple thing. It was silly, but it was something that we were able to recognize. Hey, look, you're doing the things that are going to make us successful. So here's the thing on how to celebrate: recognition wall, Lego figures, retrospective, or kudos or thumbs up column, thank you at daily stand up, recognition at the demo, and rite of passage recognition. Those are ways we can celebrate the team doing things that are team achievements. Let's see what time. Okay, I'm going to move on just in the interest of time from this one. Okay, so number 5, trick for agility number 5. Ask the right questions. So which one of these is a bad question? So look at these and try to figure out which one of these do you think is probably the worst question you could ask a team here. So one question is, why aren't you working harder? Is there anything we can simplify? When will we get our first deployment to production? Are there any stories that haven't started in the sprint? And what stories have we finished in this sprint? And I think you can actually choose 2. Will it let you choose 2? If it does, there were 2 I put on here that I intended to be not good store, like probably worse than the rest. So if it'll let you choose 2, try choosing 2. That's cute, Jess. That looks fun. Okay, so why aren't you working harder? That is probably not a good question, right? It's not a question that enables or moves people forward. We ought to be looking more about how do we remove their impediments? How do we help make them successful than just why aren't you working harder? When will we get our first deployment to production? I would say that's probably a good question, because that's focused on the flow. How do we get particularly if it's asking in a way that focuses us on getting something smaller all the way through to where we can start benefiting from it, that's probably a good question. Will probably drive the behavior that we want. The question that I would probably avoid is, are there any stories we haven't started yet in this sprint? It's okay if yes is these. Yes. So the point is, if we're asking people this, now it may be great if we've started and finished all our stories, that's awesome. That's success. But if management, or if we're going around and people feel the need, people feel that it's important to show that all the stories have been started, that is not going to drive the behavior we want of actually finishing things. Now, asking what stories have we finished is going to be much closer to do it, because if the developer has a choice between pulling something new in or helping get something across the finish line, we want to make sure that the environment we're creating for them makes it easier and doesn't impede them in any way from trying to actually get something across the finish line and finishing it. So we probably don't want to be going around asking if there are any stories that haven't started in this sprint, because that answer probably does not matter to us, or it shouldn't matter to us. We shouldn't be looking to try to figure out how much work have we started. We should be asking ourselves, how much work have we completed? When will we get our first deployment is just like, why aren't you working harder to me? Okay, so that's a good observation. When I've seen teams use that question effectively, what they're asking are questions like, is there anything that's impeding us from deploying the work that you have ready to go now? Like, how can I help you get that to production? And also asking, if they say, when do we get our first deployment to production? They say, oh, well, we've got all this stuff we're trying to do, saying, is there any way we can deliver part of that before we deliver all of it? And driving town to try to have smaller bits go all the way through rather than bigger things. But I do hear you, and I do understand, depending on how it's asked in the environments it's asked in, that might not be the best. It could come across just, why aren't you working harder? But what we want to do is drive to having smaller units delivered, but delivering them all the way through with low cycle time. Okay, so some questions. So what percentage have you finished is probably not a good question. That can tend to getting people to start more things instead of finishing things. It also usually is pretty meaningless, because if we start, it also pushes people to try to carry more buckets at the same time, because we're more likely to say, okay, yeah, what percentage are done? Well, let's knock out all the requirements. We'll get 100% of the requirements done, and then we'll be 30% complete, which is never how it works out. But then we start getting numbers back that don't have any meaning because they're not actually delivered all the way through. When was the last time you deployed to production? I think is a very good and healthy. As a matter of fact, in the book Accelerate, I think that's one of the metrics that I think they're looking at, is how long does it take from the time you deploy something till you deploy something else, and really driving that idea of we want rapid, small deployments rather than larger, higher risk deployments. Have you started all these sprint stories? That's probably going to be a really bad question to ask, because it's going to show people that what's important to management, or whoever's asking the question, is not aligned with good agility. Which stories from the sprint have been deployed is a great question to ask, because now we're focused on what have we started that we've actually completed, and there's no more hidden work. We've taken it all the way through to deployment, which should mean it's been tested and people can actually start using this. So a bad question to ask would be, can you work any faster? A good question to ask, is there anything we can simplify or defer, should have been defer or push out? Is there anything that you're working on now that we would be willing to maybe go live without, or that we could deliver this story without, so we can get something complete all the way through, get user feedback? If it turns out that's not what they want, we know before we do even more stuff on it. So trying to look for things. The other thing about this too is, usually with if it's coming from a manager or even just within the team, can you work any faster isn't a team question so much. Usually it's like, you need to do something different, instead of, can we collaborate in a way that makes us all more successful? And looking for things that can be simplified or defer is a collaborative question for how we can all be more successful together. Are you going to finish everything on time? That may not be the best question to ask. Are we working on the highest priority for the customer? This is a very good question to ask, because there's always going to be things that we could do that turn out not to be needed. If we're focused on finishing everything on time, that will often come at the expense of doing the highest priority thing. I like to ask people, if we're working on something that there is any possible future that we could go live without, or the customer might be satisfied without, if there's any possible future that they would be happy without it, then we shouldn't be working on it at the expense of something that there's no possible future that they would be happy without it, or that we could go live without it. Okay, so those are the five tricks for agility that I wanted to mention. Once again, here is that URL, and we've got a competitive quiz coming up here. We're going to give away a t-shirt. So I think let me make sure I've got all the sizes. Okay, yes, I think I've got all the sizes of the Turn Your Video On t-shirt. We value face-to-face communication. So if you're in the US, if you're not in the US and you win, let me know and we'll find some way to do something similar. So we've got some t-shirts, or a t-shirt to give away. Oh, one other thing, forgot about this. This is going on right now, so it's closed. The class is closed. We've got a small group of people, and we're going through with these 5 business books and mining them for Agile skills. This is turning out to be a whole lot of fun, even more fun than I thought it was going to be going into it. So we're having a great time talking through these, looking for ways that these books, which aren't necessarily about Agile, show us things about how we can get more agility on our teams. If you are interested in this, we go through a book summary, and there's going to be a link here. My wife's going to throw a link up here that if you, it's the one for Maven. If you go there, type in your email address, it will give you access to I think it's the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team book, which is what we just did with this group of people. We just went through last Wednesday. So you might enjoy that if you want to see like what those summaries look like. So if you go there, that'll also put you on the list that if we do another one of these, I'm going to take feedback from the people that are involved in it. We'll probably do another one maybe coming up in a few months once we kind of figure out what worked well, what people like, and maybe tweak a few things. So anyway, that's be watching for that. And if you're interested in seeing one of the summaries, go to that link, or if you're interested in more information about it. Okay, moving on to our competitive quiz, which we'll go through real fast here. So join the quiz. We're giving away a t-shirt. It says, "We value face-to-face communication. Turn your video on." I'm not going to go get it because it's over there, but you've probably seen them before, or if not, you can just be surprised. So with that link, the Maven link that was up there, you go to that link and it will give you the option to sign up for a, let me click on it, just make sure it shows one. Right, so you just type in your email address and it will send you a link that lets you get to it. And it also puts your email on this list of people that might be interested in one of these classes. So if you're interested in the book and not interested in the class, that's fine. You can unsubscribe from it. So, okay, general question. How do you avoid padding in Agile planning? Hey, Rachel, if you want to stick around at the end, let's look at that. That's a very, very good question. But yes, let's definitely talk about that in just a minute. Okay, go and join for the Slido link. Like I said, we're giving away a t-shirt to the winner here. Looks like we've got 45 people. I'll give it 5 more seconds. You can join at how to join. Okay, here's a link for Slido. It should have actually popped up in the thing, but you can click on this to get to it as well. Got it? Okay, perfect. Okay, give it 3 more seconds. 2, 1, and first question. According to this talk, which would be the least important to celebrate? Would it be meeting a sprint goal, working together well as a team, making good decisions, or finishing work that was started? According to this talk, which would be the least important to celebrate? So yes, according to this talk, meeting a sprint goal would probably be the least important to celebrate, because it's not because we don't want to meet the sprint goal, but it's more important to make sure we're doing these other things, working together well as a team, making good decisions, and finishing work that was started. If we're doing those things and we happen to have chosen a sprint, too many things in a sprint than what we can do, but we did all these other things well, that is more success, and we want to celebrate that, than if we happen to meet the sprint goal just because we didn't choose enough stuff to actually keep us busy. These other things are better indicators of our agility than just whether or not we happen to meet a particular sprint goal. Okay, and let's see, who do we have? Ruth's at the top, Mike, Vonnie, Jess, and Eric. Very good, next question. Mark said that measuring velocity is like measuring the amount of water that flows in a gutter, an aqueduct, the number of buckets of water you move, the speed of something and its direction, or a box of chocolate. Which one of these did I say velocity is like measuring in this particular talk? Yes, so the number of buckets of water you move. We're thinking of velocity is like how many things can I start and hopefully get across the finish line. So it's kind of like how many buckets do I carry across. And the downside that we mentioned with that is if I'm really, really focused on that, I'm probably going to try to carry more buckets rather than focus on how do I get good flow of small units of progress moving all the way through. And that's not to say there aren't ways to use sprints that are focused on getting small things all the way through. But in general, I've seen if people get too focused on velocity, it pushes more toward this idea of carrying more things. A lot of empty buckets are easier to move. Yes. Okay. Let's see. Mike moved to the top spot, followed by Ruth, Jess. Sorry, I'm hard reading. Okay. Demoing only what the customer can experience will do what? It keeps the customer from knowing how hard the team is working, helps constrain scope creep, or reduces transparency, or impedes return on investment. So what's the thing that we can get when we demo only what the customer can experience? And yes, the answer here was it can help constrain scope creep. One of the objections, and this is a little bit tricky, was that the customer won't know how hard the team is working. But like I said, if that's the objection, it probably is more of an indication of we need to slice our work differently than it is we need to show the customer things that don't mean anything to the customer. Okay, leaderboard. Eric pulls into the top spot. Very good. When a dev finishes a user story, what is the best thing to do next? Should they do training? Should they fill out their TPS report? Should they start a new story? Should they see if they can help finish another story that's already been started, or should they go home for the day? Now, go home for the day, that's very appealing, but I will tell you that's not the right answer here. TPS report is from a movie called Office Space, and it doesn't ever say what it is, but it's this report that everybody's asking for all the time. So yeah, sorry, I guess that was a little bit, I think that's what it was, or maybe I just made it up. But the thing they should do is help another person. Did I get that right? Was that from Office Space, the movie? Okay. Okay, yeah, see if they can help with another story that's already started. Okay, Eric's still in the top spot, followed by David, Mike, Michelle, and can't read the last name there, which was not one of the ways mentioned to celebrate team behavior. Is it a thank you at daily stand-up? Is it recognition wall? Is it kudos column at a retrospective? Lego figures or Gatorade poured over the head, which was not one of the ways we mentioned to celebrate. Doesn't mean you couldn't do it. Yes, Gatorade poured over the head. In most office environments, that probably wouldn't fly. If you're able to pull it off, though, and it's actually a positive thing, please tell me about it and send pictures. I would love to hear how that worked out for you. Okay, and yes, congratulations, David. Top spot. Very good. This looks like it was a pretty close one here. Very nice. So, David, you can take a screenshot, send me an email, just reply to one of the invite will come to me. And let me know your shirt size and where you want it sent, and I will get a t-shirt in the mail headed your way. And let's see. Okay, so thank you everybody for coming. We'll wrap this up. I'm going to go back and I want to see what there was a question somebody had that I thought wanted to talk about. Okay, so Rachel, are you still on?
I am.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes. So you're talking about a situation. Actually, let me stop the streaming here.